Episode 14 of 19. Let's dismantle the mysticism and bring it back to bone-level truth. Episode 14 is for those who've hit that internal wall, who thought they were having a spiritual awakening when really it was ego withdrawal. The sacred breakdown is real, but it's not what they told you it would be. The dark night of the soul was just ego withdrawal. What spiritual rock bottom really is, and why it's not mystical, just honest. The dark night of the soul is not divine. It is ego detox. This episode unpacks what really happens when your identity collapses and why it might be the most honest thing you'll ever live through. They said it was a dark night of the soul, that something sacred was unfolding, that your emptiness was divine. But let's be honest, you weren't shedding illusions. You were being torn from control, from performance, from your identity scaffolding. And what you felt wasn't some holy purge. It was ego withdrawal. We romanticize breakdowns, call them awakenings, wrap suffering in spiritual aesthetics to avoid sitting in it plain. But the real dark night isn't poetic. It's realizing your identity was built on fear, validation, and borrowed belief. And now, there's nothing left to perform. The dark night doesn't come because you're broken. It comes because you're done pretending. Done performing growth. Done masking wounds as wisdom. It's the moment you stop trying to transcend your humanity and finally feel the grit of your humanity. The end of ego is not enlightenment. It is silence. It is stillness where performance used to be. It is grief where identity used to stand. It's the sacred hum of, I don't know who I am anymore. And the holy fire of, but I'm not pretending to know either. So here's the invitation. Let it fall. Let the ache echo. You do not need to rebuild who you were. You just need to survive this honesty. That is sacred enough. Section 1, where dark night of the soul comes from. The phrase did not start in a yoga studio or in a wellness podcast. It began with Saint John of the Cross, a 16th century Spanish mystic. He wrote of it as a spiritual purging, a stripping of illusions, a passage through emptiness that would lead, eventually, to union with God. For him, the dark night was the silence between the believer and the divine, a sacred exile that burned away attachments until only faith remained. But here's what happened. Over centuries, the poetry got detached from the context. The mysticism slipped its roots. And in modern circles, like New Age, spiritual, even psychological, the dark night became shorthand for, you're suffering, but it's holy. And that's where the distortion begins. Because sometimes what we call dark night of the soul isn't soul at all. It is ego, an identity collapsing under its own weight. Now, let's be honest, when you're in it, you don't care about etymology. You care about survival. And calling it dark night of the soul feels more bearable than admitting you've just lost your scaffolding. There is compassion in that. Humans need metaphors to survive. We reach for the language of the sacred because it's easier to hold than the raw truth. And the truth is, your identity was never as solid as you thought. The truth is that the collapse isn't divine punishment, it is just the end of pretending. So, yes, there's certainly comfort in the mystic story, but there is also danger. Because when we romanticize collapse, we turn it into performance. We mistake ego withdrawal for spiritual promotion. And sometimes, that keeps us stuck longer than the pain itself. St. John wrote about soul. We turned it into branding. Your breakdown isn't mystical, it is just honest. Section 2, the reality. Ego withdrawal, not soul death. What most people call the dark night of the soul isn't some cosmic trial. It is ego detox. Your soul isn't in crisis. Your ego is. Because here's the truth. The breakdown isn't spiritual, it is psychological. It is literally identity unraveling. When the ego loses control, status, or coherence, it fights back. And, hey, withdrawal is ugly. You don't wake up glowing with sacred wisdom. You wake up empty, restless, raging at every self-help cliche you once clung to. You don't feel enlightened, you feel betrayed. By your mentors, by your practices, by the very voice in your head that once told you who you were. This isn't your soul dying, it is your performance losing its grip. And that fight looks like identity crisis. You cannot recognize yourself anymore. It looks like emotional numbness. The affirmations bounce off like static. It looks like irritation at every platitude. Trust the process feels like a slap in the face. It looks like rage at the idea of transcendence when you can barely get out of bed. It feels like a spiritual crisis because we've been taught to frame suffering as sacred. But what you're actually living through is ego deconstruction. The scaffolding collapses, and for the first time, there is no audience left to clap for the act. That silence, that is not failure, that is the withdrawal. You are detoxing from a lifetime of identity fixes. Validation hits, belief systems that once made you feel coherent. It's not glamorous, and it is not mystical. It is just real. The dark night isn't your soul dying. It is your ego detoxing from applause. Section 3. What causes it? Ego withdrawal does not come out of nowhere. Something kicks the legs out from under your identity. It could be a divorce, a job loss, the collapse of a belief system, the sudden absence of whatever you used to lean on to know who you were. And when that anchor disappears, the ego scrambles. It claws at the walls, desperate to keep the scaffolding intact. That scramble feels like despair, but really, it is just disorientation. Sometimes the trigger is overexposure to spiritual bypassing. You stacked mantras and vision boards on top of wounds that never healed. And eventually, reality kicked the door in, as reality always will. Sometimes it's trauma you mislabeled as karma. You told yourself it was a lesson, but your nervous system never got the memo. It just stored the impact until you couldn't outrun it anymore. And sometimes it is the most ordinary thing. You hit the wall where growth no longer feels exciting, where self-help feels like empty calories, where every trick and tool leaves you even more exhausted than before. That is when ego withdrawal sets in. Here is what the neuroscience shows. The brain craves coherence. We are wired to maintain a consistent self-story. When that story collapses, the brain's prediction systems misfire, creating anxiety and disorientation. Next, we have the default mode network, or the DMN. This part of the brain ties together memory, identity, and self-talk. In breakdowns, it goes haywire. Old loops collapse, but new ones haven't yet formed. That limbo feels like identity death. The next thing we have is dopamine withdrawal. Every identity, parent, partner, healer, achiever, comes with predictable rewards. Lose the role, and you lose the dopamine. Your brain literally goes into a chemical crash. And finally, we have trauma resurfacing. Suppressed memories and unprocessed pain rise up when the scaffolding falls. All the dams break that were holding it back. Your nervous system interprets all of this as a threat, not enlightenment. Put simply, your brain is losing the script it used to follow. And until a new pattern stabilizes, you feel like you're unraveling. That unraveling is not mystical. It is strictly biology. And it hurts like hell. But here's the hidden mercy. Once the performance collapses, you're forced to stop pretending. Ego withdrawal does feel like soul death. But neuroscience says, hey, this is just your brain losing a script. Section 4. Signs you're in ego withdrawal. Here's how you know you're not in a mystical dark night. You're in ego withdrawal. Ready? Here we go. If this sounds familiar, you'll know. First thing, nothing works anymore. Not the journaling, not the mantras, not the meditation app you swore by last year. All the tools feel like toys now. Then you start questioning the point of everything. Not in a depressed, I don't want to live way, in a stripped down, what is the point of any of this way? But this is not nihilism. It's exhaustion with illusions. You also feel betrayed by the voices you once trusted. The mentors, the gurus, the influencers who packaged pain like it was a path. Suddenly, their words sound like snake oil. Because they kinda were. You're no longer impressed by your own awareness. All those insights you used to share with pride, now they feel hollow. You can see through your own performance, and you don't even clap for yourself anymore. You crave raw, simple, honest existence. You don't want more mantras. You want a nap. You don't want enlightenment. You want a meal that doesn't feel like a metaphor. And here's the kicker, your nervous system knows the difference. When you are in ego withdrawal, your body does not crave expansion. It craves regulation. Ground under your feet. Air in your lungs. Something solid enough to remind you you're still here. You're not reaching for God. You are reaching for gravity. That is not regression. That is just reality. You are not craving enlightenment. You're craving ground. That is ego withdrawal talking. Section 5. The dangers of mystifying it. The moment you call ego withdrawal a sacred dark night, you've already turned it into theater. And theater is exactly what keeps people stuck. Because once you wrap collapse in mystical language, a few things happen. 1. You turn pain into performance. Suddenly, your suffering is content. Every breakdown is a post. Every sleepless night is a caption about transcendence. You're not surviving the ache, you're staging it. Number 2, you slip into spiritual narcissism. I'm in my sacred dark night. Translation: my suffering makes me special. Collapse becomes a badge. You get to feel superior while you're drowning. Number 3, you avoid seeking real help. Therapy, medication, grounding routines, those feel unspiritual because you've convinced yourself that this collapse is holy, not human. So you keep bypassing the actual support you really do need. And lastly, you delay integration. As long as you frame it as destiny, you don't have to face the mess. You can tell yourself the universe is working on you, instead of admitting you're just unraveling. And while you wait for enlightenment to crown you, your life rots in the corner. Mystifying ego withdrawal does not make it sacred. It makes it sticky. It prolongs the ache. Because the more you romanticize it, the less you actually move through it. The real sacredness isn't in the branding. It's in the burning. In letting collapse be collapse. Plain, brutal, and human. Stop mystifying your breakdown. It is not destiny. It is detox. Section 6. What it actually means to move through it. If you want to actually move through ego withdrawal, stop trying to make it pretty. You don't transcend it, you survive it. That survival looks boring from the outside, but it is the only thing that actually works. Stop performing transformation. You don't need to narrate the collapse. You don't need to brand the silence. Your life is not a reel. It is a nervous system trying to stabilize. Let go of the story. Forget awakening. Forget initiations. Stop labeling every ache like it is a syllabus from the universe. This is not coursework, it is collapse. Choose embodiment over enlightenment. Eat, sleep, move your body. Feed the animal before you feed the myth. Your brain cannot stabilize if your body is starving. Talk less, feel more. The words will tempt you to post, to explain, to make meaning. Resist. Feel instead. Let silence be the container. Trust the stillness, even if it feels like death. That hollow space where nothing fits anymore, that is not failure. That is the ego detoxing. Stillness is not absence, it is repair in disguise. This is how you move through it. Not by finding answers, but by finally dropping the performance that kept you from being here in the first place. It is not enlightenment, it is honesty. You don't move through ego withdrawal by transcending it. You move through ego withdrawal by feeding the body and letting silence hold you. Section 7. Final words. It is not the soul that is dying. The soul isn't in crisis. The soul was never fragile enough to collapse. What is dying is the scaffolding, the applause addiction, the identity that told you who you were supposed to be. The dark night of the soul was never about the soul. It was about the ego detoxing. And detox is messy. It shakes. It burns. It strips you of every performance you thought was necessary to belong. But what's left isn't emptiness. It is the first quiet you've felt in years. The sacredness isn't that it looks beautiful. It is that it burns everything you never needed. And what remains is finally just you. No costume, no caption, no witness required. The dark night doesn't make you enlightened. It makes you honest. And in a world addicted to performance, honesty is sacred enough. Remember, the soul isn't dying. The ego is detoxing. And what is left is finally just you.